talking? We're talking. All right. Thank you so much. I hope everybody had a great lunch and has enjoyed the event thus far. I found it extremely educational and a lot of fun. And I think we're going to kick this off and have a lot of fun too. This is a panel, and we're going to be talking about platforms and hybrid clouds. It's billed as a Smackdown. I'm sure we're not going to see actually any smacks. This may be more like The View than it will be like Piers Morgan, and I'm definitely not Piers Morgan, that's for sure. And really the goal here is to talk about what trends are within platforms and so forth. And what I'd like to do is ask each of you to kind of very briefly, introduce yourself and your companies. And I do mean briefly. No need to go into what your GPA was or anything like that. So I'll start with you, Peder. Could you just go ahead?
So my name is Peder Ulander. I'm the Vice President of Product Marketing at Citrix, where I'm responsible for the Cloud Platforms team. We have a cloud orchestration tool based on the Apache CloudStack project.
My name is Marten Mickos. I'm the CEO of Eucalyptus Systems. And Eucalyptus is the world's most widely deployed private cloud software platform, open source.
My name is Kemp. I was one of the co-founders of the OpenStack project. I am the founder and CEO of Nebula. And Nebula is one of the larger contributors to the OpenStack project. We have 4 of the 5 project technical leads that are working on various projects. And we're building a hardware system based on the OpenStack technology.
So I've got a couple of questions we're going to go through. I hope that we'll have some time for some questions from the audience. But I want to start off with a kind of a harkening back to something that happened recently. Just to kind of note here, because I would say, while not solely, many of your customers are enterprise customers, a preponderance of customers. And Marten, you identified yourself as being the largest. And when I think about enterprises, if you think about enterprises and where they've been, they already have a virtualization vendor, generally speaking. Not trying to poke any holes at Citrix, but probably the preponderance of them have VMware. And VMware has its own product in this space that they can be used for an enterprise cloud. And yet, each of you has received funding and achieved traction in this marketplace by selling into a place where nominally, at least, there should be an entrenched competitor. So my question to you is, and I'll start with you, Chris, is tell us about your customers and why they would be turning to you rather than going with what I would assume would be an easier choice, which is, hey, that stuff you're already delivering us, throw a little bit more on the back of the truck of the VMware stuff. You could help us understand that.
Yeah, I think, first of all, I think it's important to differentiate OpenStack from Nebula and OpenStack from perhaps the other companies here represented in the panel. I mean, OpenStack is a platform. It's a reference implementation, and I think there are a lot of different implementations that we'll see. OpenStack is now included in every major Linux distribution. It's being implemented by organizations like HP. Rackspace is moving to it. So I think we're going to see a number of different products that emerge that enterprises will consume and that service providers will build that leverage this underlying technology. I think that openness is really the key to why people are choosing this platform. We've had, just as an example, over 200,000 downloads this year alone of the OpenStack project just from the website. And this does not count from other companies that are packaging like Red Hat and Canonical the system. So there are many more customers deploying OpenStack than I can even begin to count right now. Mm-hmm. And I think it's because of the promise of that platform. It's the community and the breadth of the community. We have 88 countries represented. There were over 350 developers that contributed code in the last few months to the project, to the most recent release. And so I think it's that traction and that openness and that community that is really what folks are looking at. If something as important as the next 25 years of IT infrastructure is at stake, you would want that to be a well-funded, open foundation, not one individual private company that's kind of driving the project.
So
was that about us?
Before we go on to you, Marten, let me just sort of come back, Chris, just sort of drill down on this. So are you saying that at least part of the reason that people are looking to Nebula and maybe OpenStack by generalization is that to despite having chosen a proprietary product for their virtualization platform, they are desirous of an open source or a community cloud orchestration layer? Is that part of what's driving them toward?
I think it's about competition and options. I think that it's hard for an enterprise to bet on any startup, let alone a new startup. And I think, with the exception of Citrix here on stage, we'd both fall into that category. So having an implementation of a core technology like OpenStack be the foundation of your product. So if you build applications on a product based on OpenStack, you can buy a number of different products that might support those applications, and you can even run those applications in public cloud infrastructures from large service providers, whether they be telcos or whether they be more contemporary cloud service providers. That is something enterprises want. They don't want to make a bet on a technology that's going to be at the core of their infrastructure that does not have that level of traction, that isn't going to be around in 10 years. And I think OpenStack, for many, offers that promise, and increasingly, as the project has become more successful, I think it's increasingly so.
Okay. Marten, so you're not you personally, I didn't mean you personally, but your company is the most widely deployed enterprise cloud solution in the world. And that was very modest because you didn't claim the solar system or the galaxy. So what has led your customers to seek your company out, rather than sticking with kind of the tried and true, already established proprietary offering?
Well, I have this joke that I never finished, but I'm looking forward to the finish of it. A cloud guy, an operations guy, and a VMware sales guy walk into a bar. And what we're saying here is that there are different approaches to on-premise cloud, which is what we are in. And VMware represents an extension of the hypervisor. So whenever they offer you a cloud solution, they think in terms of virtualization. And there's another school, which I think OpenStack represents, which is operations-led. And that's why Rackspace and NASA were founders of the project, where they think about, they've been building large data centers all their lives, and they're coming from the hardware side and building a cloud. And the third approach is the cloud approach that we and other vendors represent, where we think about the applications and giving the applications freedom to run workloads anywhere, freedom to scale up and scale down. And so we look more at the applications than anything else. So when we meet a customer who's running virtualization from VMware, you would say, why would they look at us? And the main reason is that they want a true, genuine cloud platform, not an extension to the hypervisor. Another one is they need leverage against VMware. VMware has 3 billion or 4 billion or 5 billion in cash, and you guys gave it to them. And many customers don't want to give more money to them, so they look for ways to combine Xen and KVM as hypervisors in the same data center. And if they use a product like Eucalyptus, they can orchestrate the whole data center, and the applications won't even know which underlying infrastructure it is. So those are some of the reasons why they would come to us. But sure, there are always large corporations who will always stick to their favorite vendor, no matter how expensive it is and no matter how much they get locked in. And this I learned at MySQL, which I worked for before this. We kept disrupting Oracle every day, but we didn't have much of a dent on their profits. So it's interesting that the IT world is today so large that the disruptor can feel that it's going fantastically well, and the disruptor can do very, very well, and the big incumbent may not even feel it. That's the dimensions we have here. So I predict that VMware will be very successful over the next 5 to 10 years, but I do think that they just inherently represent a virtualization-led school of thought. And in our world, we used to be a science project, so we had people who just thought about it freely. They said that the hypervisor and the virtualization actually should be part of the hardware, and ultimately it will get compressed into the CPU level. And that's why building a cloud platform is very much different and just a different philosophy, even though those two products are very close to each other. So those are some of the reasons.
Okay. I think you're being modest about your MySQL success. You may not have dented the profits, but I maintain that most of the growth in the database business went to MySQL. So because
yeah, that's true, but it didn't stop Ellison from buying an island.
Yes, I used to joke that the difference between open source CEOs and proprietary CEOs was when the open source CEO said, I'm going to go down and pick out a Gulfstream model, they meant they were going to Hobbytown to pick up an assemble yourself plastic one.
I have a nice rowing boat.
Peter, so back to the subject. Why are people seeking you out rather than sticking with the tried and true?
Well, I think so. Both of these reasons are absolutely valid. We spent some time with Morgan Stanley, one of our customers, and when we met with their CIO, one of the statements he made is, cloud is effectively a transformation in enterprise IT, and when they make this decision, it will be a decision that they have to live with for the next 10 years. So they're not just going to take what's in play today. They're going to look at a lot of the different options out there. And I think whether it's OpenStack or Eucalyptus or CloudStack, these are three technologies that were built from the ground up to address the needs of cloud, address the needs of scale, address the needs of manageability. As we look at virtualization as a core foundation in cloud, the reality is many of the clouds out there today don't even run virtualization in the platform. So when we engage with customers, it tends to come back to the workloads that they're trying to run. We're in a unique position with CloudStack in the sense that we have the ability to run these cloud scale, cloud native apps, right, that tend to run on open source hypervisors or bare metal with simple networks to complex enterprise apps that might run on, best on top of a VMware implementation or something like OVM or Hyper-V. Customers that have the ability to take those underlying architectures, yet manage them from a single pane, right, and provide the same policies, the same apps across their users, actually tend to be the most comfortable way for them to get into the cloud. It's almost as if it's the gateway drug. Start with that VMware virtualization layer and start putting cloud on top of that, but go for greenfield clouds under a different type of hypervisor or virtualization layer, but have a single management pane that gives you access to all of those. And that tends to be why companies choose CloudStack.
Okay. So I want to follow up a little bit, and this is sort of themes that maybe I was going to ask this couple of questions anyway, but James Staten, I think, really underlined them. And I don't know if each of you were able to see them this morning, but one of the things he brought up was that a lot of IT organizations are building what they say is a private cloud, so I'm curious as to when you're working with end customers, what kinds of challenges do they have when they sort of go, okay, I'm ready to, I'm going to roll up my sleeves and build a cloud. Kind of what kinds of things do they run into that, and if you want to say this is the way we help solve it, that's okay too. Don't mind, but because I think real world, there's a lot of smoke around private cloud, but it's hard to say how much fire is in that. So could you talk about kind of the challenges around that? And we'll start with Peter because we.
Sure. No problem. So we've done a fairly substantial job working with a number of different enterprises out in the marketplace, whether it's classic technology enterprise, right? So the Nokias or the Informaticas of the world, to classic brick and mortar, Bechtel or Aetna, to animation and social media companies like Zynga or Disney. Each one of those use cases starts differently because you're dealing with different buyers in the organization. Some cases it's classic CIOs or IT staff that has concepts around manageability, starting with virtualization. How do they build a cloud and make it effective for their users? In other cases, you're dealing with the CTO, someone who's looking to use this as a competitive weapon or a competitive service for how they're delivering their apps and technologies to the marketplace. Probably the biggest challenge that each and every one of these faces is really understanding how the cloud plays into their strategy, what's the successful route forward, and ultimately how do they break the mold of their competitors within the organization that enable them to go build this. So for example, when you're dealing with a CTO, he's got to deal with the frustrations of IT ops, capacity management or policy management or things along those lines, and understanding how can I get that Amazon agility without the tax of classic IT ops. On the flip side, you've got a CIO watching all of his users go to Amazon, right? And how do I bring in a technology now that takes that knowledge of where my users are and enables them to do it all internally under my policy and under my control? So walking them through a rollout strategy, identifying success factors and success criteria, and really helping them understand how to get to a cloud versus just implementing software tends to be the biggest challenge that we see as we get into the enterprise.
So that sounds like vision and operational stuff, not a technology issue. So that's how I interpret what you've just said. Marten?
So we have a number of customers who have no problems, but of course we also have many who do have them, because this is a very new technology area. And for us, we have two types of customers. Some of them come from the cloud to us, so they grew up on the cloud, and then they decide to build an on-premise environment. So it's the first time they build a server room or a data center. And then we have the other category of those who have a data center, they virtualized it, and they're taking the step to cloud. And they have different challenges. Those who come from the cloud side, they completely understand the concepts of Eucalyptus. They understand that we have the AWS API. They understand all of that. But they haven't operated a data center. So when we tell them that they need to plan carefully for it, that's what they need to learn. They need to learn the sysadmin skills to get it done, because an on-premise environment requires caretaking in a way that the public cloud doesn't. So they have to learn that side. Then the ones who have been running data centers all their lives, they know that part completely. But for them, it's new to think in terms of cloud. And what does it mean? What does the API mean? How do you do this? What's the difference between VMware's offering and Eucalyptus, and how do they compare them, and how will they use them? So we have to deal with two different sets of challenges there.
It sounds to me like you should be getting each of your, pairing up your customers and getting them to merge, so they can bring those two sides together.
Well, it is sort of the secret to our business model is here, because there are people who are only data center minded and who will never adopt the cloud thinking. They are not our target customers. And there are other customers who will always be on the public cloud, who will never go on-prem, and they're also not our target customers. So we are very much in the intersection. And we just, on our website, there's a blog posting by one of our employees who came from VMware, and he talks about the struggle he had in learning, relearning things, because he had been so well trained, as I guess they call it at VMware, about virtualization, that he had to rewire his brain to understand how Eucalyptus works.
I read that post. It was a very interesting post.
Yeah.
So, Chris, what kinds of things do you see in the challenges with your customer base or prospect
I'm afraid
base?
I have to violently agree with Marten and Peder here.
Something is wrong now.
All right, the next question is going to be about standards, because we need to line things up.
Actually, I have a comment, though, along with that agreement. I mean, I think, I've given a talk called the Enterprise Cloud Paradox, which attempts to kind of talk about the characteristics of a cloud environment versus the characteristics of an enterprise IT environment. And I think that one of the challenges is, while there are there's some examples of companies that are quote-unquote pure cloud companies, to Marten's comment, more often you'll end up having both of these forces within a company, even if it's an internet company. Even companies that have begun to scale that are pure internet companies end up having this bifurcation that occurs between folks that run the kinds of applications that depend on static infrastructure, that are more well-suited towards traditional storage infrastructures, traditional static network architectures, and virtualization environments from VMware. And there's a whole ecosystem. In fact, I was at VMworld walking around just talking to everyone a few weeks ago at the Moscone Center, and it's quite impressive, the ecosystem that has reinforced and trained, if you will, to use Marten's word, people how to think about how to build an infrastructure like that. And that's what is dominated, that's what you'll find in the enterprise. And so to answer from Nebula's perspective, we believe that trying to solve this paradox is, I think, something that one product and one company should not attempt to do. And I think, to the extent that there's a beachhead strategy opportunity with CloudStack reaching into VMworld, vCenter, and then providing a cloud infrastructure, you're forcing these two diametrically opposed, fundamentally incompatible cultures, people, perspectives, their values are not aligned. And I think while you might get their attention and you might get some pilots and some traction, I really think that the future infrastructure and future application architectures are different enough that there is a fundamentally new kind of infrastructure entering the enterprise. And it's captured by what Facebook's doing with the Open Compute project. It's moving the complexity from the hardware and the storage and the networks up into the software. And the only way we're going to deliver this to the enterprise, from our perspective, is to put it in a box and ship it to them. And it won't do both. And I think that's a fundamentally different perspective, I think, that we bring to the table. And OpenStack just happens to be versatile enough to be a platform for both. And I think that's how we relate back to the OpenStack project.
So, so I'd like to then follow up with something else and get your guys' thoughts. And this really moves toward the hybrid piece. And I'll declare sort of my interest, or my company's interest, which is we're a cloud management software company. George Reese, who spoke earlier, I don't know if everybody saw him, is our CTO. And a large part of our value proposition is we enable corporations to manage, organizations to manage hybrid cloud environments. And from our perspective, what we've seen increasingly in the marketplace is what I'd call, in most companies, pursuing an and strategy. A year and a half ago, it was, we're going to build a private cloud, and then everybody will start using that, and they'll stop using Amazon or whatever, but it was generally Amazon. And oftentimes you'd sort of hear kind of under their breath, force them to stop using that. Those days are gone. Now they've kind of, whatever, and it's an and strategy. And James this morning was quite eloquent that Amazon has a huge proportion of the throw weight in the marketplace. So I'd like to sort of turn to the hybrid piece. We've talked about why people would choose you rather than the incumbent vendor. We've talked about the challenges. Now we're looking at an environment that actually spans beyond the internal data center, beyond the corporate enterprise environment, and it's a more complex environment. How does that sort of play into what you guys run into? How does that play into the organizations you're dealing with? James was sort of talking about how the private cloud stuff is the domain of the operations folks and the apps groups, so it's kind of like cats and dogs living together, something like that. So Chris, what do you see in terms of out with your customer base and how they're dealing with that and how that impinges you and your business strategy?
That's a big question. I think that there are some service providers like Amazon that have focused on the public cloud myopically. I mean, they've really, and maybe they've partnered with some companies to maintain some level of API compatibility, right? But their strategy is completely focused on operations, efficiency, and public cloud infrastructure, and the leverage that they get from buying and operating infrastructure at scale. And Microsoft is going to try to break out of that with what they're doing with Azure and the Windows Server stuff. But I think Amazon being the dominant force in the market is an example of that. And then on the other end of the spectrum, you have this OpenStack open source platform, which is being adopted by a lot of service providers. And I think there's this perfect storm, if you will, of the same platform which hundreds of thousands of people are downloading that they can install and they can run on a laptop, and they can literally have free access to every line of code in the entire platform. And make no mistake, there was a comment about OpenStack becoming the Unix of the cloud. That's just not true. I mean, every deployment of OpenStack, from Rackspace to HP to the product companies like Canonical and Red Hat that are deploying OpenStack, are deploying every bit of code that you can check out from openstack.org today. There is no fracturing. That is a myth.
But they're adding closed source code, aren't they?
They're
like
adding
HP.
They're adding platform services. They're augmenting the platform, but they're deriving it from Essex and Diablo and Folsom and Grizzly and the code base.
But how is that not fragmentation?
It's not fragmentation because it's derived from the exact same code base.
So they're all compatible? Every
2 weeks, they're the same APIs. I love the debate, but I mean, basically every 2 weeks.
I knew the gloves would come off at some point, and
every 2 weeks, the code that is checked in by developers is being ingested into what Rackspace is providing in their public cloud infrastructure. That's true. So, in any case, and we're using Folsom right now in the product development work that we're doing. So there isn't as much fragmentation as there might be perceived to be. But that wasn't my point. My point is that it is so accessible to people, right? You can download it, you can run it on a laptop. You can also go to a number of different service providers that are offering this as a service. So the nexus of public cloud making this, you can go to tristack.org and in 2 minutes be running OpenStack for free right now. It's available as a public cloud service that HP is hosting. You can also go download it and run it on your laptop. That's a nexus of opportunity we haven't seen in IT in a long time. And without cloud, you wouldn't be able to try it in 30 seconds. And without an Apache open source project with thousands of contributors, you wouldn't be able to download it and have it running on your laptop in a few minutes. The whole thing.
So that's going to be the assignment for all of you during the next break is go and download this and have it up and running by the time we come back. Marten, so what are you seeing about this kind of hybrid Amazon and world?
Well, we see Amazon as the absolutely dominant public cloud vendor there in the IaaS space. They have a market share of 80% or maybe more, and we partner with them, and we're the only on-premise cloud platform that they partner with. So we have a different philosophy here in that we think that what's essential is the freedom of the workloads to move between clouds and to scale up and scale down. But we do think it's different software that you develop to manage it. Because if you build a public cloud like Amazon, you go for a singular design that you scale enormously. You have the same hardware, the same CPU. You make one choice there. The customers we see have a variety of different servers and operating systems and hypervisors. So we must design our software so that it can live in that heterogeneous environment. But up on the top, it's the same API. So customers can move workloads. And there are examples, a gaming company in Europe where they move games between AWS and Eucalyptus, and they can do it for a variety of reasons. They have different performance characteristics, different financials, different, it's a rent versus buy situation. So that's one, and there's a telecom equipment manufacturer that does that with workloads as well. So for us, it's important to make sure the API is unified, and that opens it up, meaning you can go anywhere, you can move your workloads, and it's up to you. And then for us vendors, we go through the hard work of stitching it all together and making sure that our software runs on the infrastructure that you have.
Okay. Peder.
Sure. So from a hybrid perspective, we don't necessarily view hybrid as being private to Amazon. We view an element of it being private to public, but we also view things like public to public and private to private. So we have a number of examples where we have service providers that may front end an Amazon service with their own service pieces with SLAs and guarantees and infinite capacity with regards to enabling their customers to embrace a public cloud, to where we see community clouds, educational systems across Japan where we have 5 private educational clouds tethered together where everyone shares resources, accounts, etc. In order to do that, there's been a lot of work within our platform to focus on how do you support multiple implementations across the board. If it is a start on Amazon, federate with a private, we've done that with a few Amazon large-scale customers, and we've done that because we've modeled the Amazon style cloud of computing. We've used the Amazon style APIs and enabled some of Amazon's largest customers to achieve that private to Amazon. In the case of the academic community clouds, it's about federating identity and driving consistent user experiences as well as multiple availability zones tied together through one single console that they can put out to all of the students. That's been a big element of it. So for us, we have the same challenges, I think, as Eucalyptus with regards to having different type of architectures that we have to solve for, whether it's different types of virtualization, networking, storage modules. So we actually have a plug-in, pluggable architecture that enables that, and then driving that commonality, that abstraction up higher around APIs, user interfaces, and classic management systems.
Okay. Don't we have till 1:45? 6 more minutes?
That was with Q&A.
Right. Okay. So we have about 5 minutes for questions. Questions out there? And if you don't, I'm going to get on to the really nasty questions that'll result in a fight. Yeah.
All the discussion is about Amazon. It sounds like the discussion is about EC2 and storage. What about all the other things like simple workflow and simple queuing service, all these other products, if you will?
The extended services that
all those
Amazon
other,
offers beyond.
how will those get dealt with? Because it sounds like what you should do is all of these things will allow us to move instances around, but we shouldn't build above that.
Eucalyptus or Citrix will build them, or a number of startups will get funded that will invest in a platform that is being used by. You can't define freedom as moving workloads between Amazon and Eucalyptus. And I think if you're a startup and your pitch to your VCs is, we're going to build a queuing service or a scalable relational database service that runs on Amazon and Eucalyptus, to some extent, you want a broader market than that. And I think you also don't want to build a startup that has basically one exit strategy, which is an acquisition by Amazon. I mean...
Wow. Bernard, you didn't have to ask any questions.
But I think that's the opportunity of OpenStack, right? I mean, there's a richer ecosystem of people that have deployed it in a broader set of products and services.
Yeah. I actually
copy
think that
Amazon?
there's more freedom in a model where you take the dominant API and you implement it under open source, and you implement it under the GPL license, which prevents other vendors from close sourcing it, which we have seen with the Apache licensed projects. It may not happen, but it can happen. So we have this debate about the freedom with the OpenStack guys, and they've sort of taken the word and ran with it, and you can run in that direction. But I think in a careful analysis, you will see that freedom depends on what freedom you have, but the best way to protect freedom is to have a principle where you share everything, and those who get it, they share it back with you. And we have a very good example. MySQL got acquired in 2008, soon 5 years ago. Still, the dominant database in its space, completely free and open source software. There are forks out there if somebody doesn't trust Oracle, but Oracle itself, therefore, is compelled to keep it developing and advancing in a way that otherwise wouldn't happen. So I'm happy to debate the freedom with you. It's more than 2 minutes or 3 minutes, but just as a starting point.
It's an open source.
So GPL is a good way to keep people honest.
Well, I think there's a reason why Linux was so remarkably successful. Many reasons, and one is that they use the GPL license. And I do think we see in the Android space what happens, that you can get into fragmentation, and you shift the power from those who develop software to those who develop hardware. And maybe that's fine for hardware developers, but I stand up for software developers. I think the open source software developers should have the power. The risk is that the power is taken by those who build hardware or who operate services. That's why I'm a huge believer in the GPL license. But I can be wrong, and apparently I am wrong according to...
And real quick, because I want to build on something that Marten said that I think is important. I think we talk about Amazon because of the fact that it does have 80% share out there. Adopting their API is very similar to when Linux adopted a lot of the Unix models, because what you're doing is you're taking an ecosystem of partners that are already making money somewhere and giving them an easy on-ramp to your solution. As well as providing your customers with that choice and flexibility. And I think when we look at CloudStack and what we're building, we have a base platform. I mean, to use Chris's term, it is a platform that gives you the core services of compute, network, and storage. And as you get into things like storage, companies like Basho, Caringo, et cetera, they're able to basically plug in and provide object store. When you think about databases, Tengen or Basho again, or companies like that, that's actually where you're seeing companies pick and choose the pieces that are relevant for them to either compete with Amazon or model their Amazon service. And that's going to come from the ecosystem. It's not something that we're necessarily going to build in the core product today. It's what's being built on top of our platform, and that's where we've seen a lot of success.
We have 2 minutes, and I want to challenge you to end. So I want to end on a high note, not so everybody feels good when they leave. What is, if you can do this, 3 of you in 2 minutes, what's the coolest thing being done with your platform that people wouldn't know about but would be pretty excited to hear about?
I've got one. I was just at the Stanford XLDB conference, and the guys at CERN that were working on discovering the Higgs boson are building a 250,000 node OpenStack, or excuse me, 250,000 core OpenStack cluster to do all the data processing for the Large Hadron Collider. And they're giving a talk in San Diego on this in a few weeks at the OpenStack Design Summit.
I don't want this to be sort of, I've got to top that, but that's pretty cool. And when I cured cancer, then, so Marten,
So I was very touched when we heard about the project in Bangladesh where they are fighting illiteracy by providing compute power into small villages, and they run it on the Eucalyptus platform. And it's useful for the world, And I was amazed that our product, which generally is known as a little bit complex to use, was so easy to use that they got up and running with it without our help. So I smile every time I think about it.
Okay, Peder.
So I'll build on the OpenStack one, because what's interesting is while CERN has done a phenomenal job with regards to building or planning to build their large cluster, one of the things that CERN did in discovering the particle was actually federate it out to a number of academic institutions around the globe to help them with all the research and compute that was required in order to go do that. And I'm happy to say that there's been a number of CloudStack implementations that were actually supporting that effort as well today in production, long before they had to go build the 250,000 core system.
All right, good. Well, could everyone please give a round of applause for our panel?
Thank you.
Thanks, Peder.